Almost everyone is talking about AI adoption. This is the hottest. Technology is the hottest topic. But here's the truth, a lot of leaders are jumping in without a clear plan. And that almost guarantees wasted time, money, and failed AI deployments. The challenge isn't whether AI has potential, it's more about how to avoid the common mistakes that keep companies stuck in pilot projects. In today's episode of An Eye on AI, I'm joined by once again Glenn Russell, Global AI Practice Lead at Egen, to break down where leaders go wrong and, more importantly, how to get on the right path with AI adoption this year. As we all know, almost everybody is jumping on AI bandwagon. Everybody is embracing it. Everybody is looking at it like hammer and nail situation. When you look at organizations, what are some of the most common mistakes leaders make when they first try to adopt AI?
Well, I think it's like any other piece of technology when it boils down to it, Swapnil. It comes down to understanding what the problem is you're trying to solve. I think AI is obviously in a way, it's an evolutionary technology as opposed to revolutionary, as much as the CEOs of Anthropic and OpenAI would want us to believe. And I think that brings with this both benefits but caveats. And I think that one of the biggest mistakes companies make is simply not understanding the problem they're trying to solve out of the gate. It's not it's not some kind of magic dust which you can sprinkle on your business and all of a sudden things get better. It requires thought, it requires planning like any other piece of technology.
Thank you for sharing that. Building on that, if a leader wants to start fresh in 2026, what's your recommendation for the very first step they should take?
I think it starts with why, Swapnil. And let me just double click into that a second. Like I said, AI is a revolutionary technology, but what we're seeing right now is more evolutionary in business. Now, I think it starts with understanding exactly the outcome you want, and that might be an outcome that sees 20% increase in customer retention. It might mean you answer tickets, 10% faster. And understanding that that is the target and not simply adopting a piece of technology, that's key in a number of ways. Number one, it helps you understand what success is. And secondly, and as if not more importantly, and you touched on this already, Swapnil, is you need to bring your organization along for the journey. Because there's so much both hype and some of it warranted, some of it not, around what AI is going to do to the workplace. Now, I'm not one that buys into the idea that we're going to see catastrophic job losses across white collar industries. This is very much a people first technology where people are augmented by the technology and not replaced. And so communicating that to your organization, that the outcome you're looking for is one of the KPIs or something similar that I just talked about. And that is why we're looking at adopting particular AI technology. It can also help understanding, well, what kind of AI technology are we thinking of adopting? Because I think a lot of the hype is about generative AI, but and we can talk about it, but a lot of what we're seeing are hybrid approaches where we're taking generative AI and we're maybe taking some more traditional machine learning models and even just using plain old deterministic code to achieve the best results. And starting small with a well understood problem is how I would suggest a leader starts the journey and communicating that to the broader organization. So in a way, it's a classic digital transformation problem.
Now, even if they have right plan in place, right strategy in place, there are some natural challenges. It could be privacy, it could be compliance, it could be security, depending on the organization, it could be culture. What are some of the most common challenges you see to getting started with adopting AI applications?
Well, I mean, you come off with a pretty good list already, Swapno, but let me just bring my own perspective to that. Lots of the organizations we work with are large financials, maybe they're large media companies. And the first problem is always people. And I don't mean to imply that people are a problem as such, but that, again, back to a previous point, if you're not bringing people along for the journey and not getting, first off, executive buy-in, and that means that, very much we're talking about dealing with people's data. And so if we need to get hold of HR data to enable our systems, if we need to get hold of operational data or policies, if we're not able to grease the wheels, so to speak, at leadership level, then these AI initiatives may well fall flat. Secondly, I'd say, and related to that, is a very real problem simply of integration. Do the endpoints exist? Do the data silos exist that we can begin to bring into our platforms to start to realize those benefits of connecting our HR data to our, to our employee data, to our, operational data, to our security data. And so, those two things are very key. And the third one, of course, is skills and training. And I think AI is such a broad field that, and it quite rightly in some regards terrifies people. But I think the kind of AI we're talking about when we're talking about what seems to work best in industry, it's kind of a boring answer, but it's back office automation. It's human in the loop. It's helping humans do repetitive tasks better. It's not about learning hardcore mathematics or any of that stuff that we did at university when we were doing AI. It's really just about understanding how to get the best out of the tools. And I think that's the same for AI tools as it is for any other piece of technology. So people should not fear it. And back to a previous point I made, Swapnil, that's why that organizational buy-in and that why is so important up front.
That's so true, which is more or less like a lot of organizations struggle with readiness, both organizational and data. How can leaders realistically assess if they're actually ready to build AI applications?
Well, again, it comes back to understanding the why and consequently the what. Swapnil. Again, I don't want to underplay the role of skills. Not everybody needs a PhD in artificial intelligence. I think what they really need is to understand systems from an overall integration point of view. Because as much as some AI truthsayers might deny it, AI technology is like any other piece of technology. And if your internal processes and your own digital transformation journey is already underway, I think you're well placed, and your change management, by the way, is also very functional. I think you're already well placed to adopt artificial intelligence as any other piece of technology. But if you're dealing with legacy systems, if you're dealing with lots of technical debt, if, for example, again, speaking anecdotally, Swapnil, it takes 2 days to recover from, a failing disk or software, you're probably not ready for adopting a technology like AI, but arguably you're not ready for adopting any additional piece of technology. So if the audience could take away one thing, Swapnil, it's that it's AI is not some mystical beast which is self-healing and can run itself and can just realize benefits out of the box. It needs that proper foundation. And so in order to be ready, it really comes at looking at existing processes, where you are in a digital transformation journey, and being confident that you know how to run and manage your existing data platforms, your existing cloud platforms, internal platforms as appropriate. That's the starting point.
Now, when they are through this, once they get past readiness, the next question is cost. What frameworks do you suggest for thinking about the investment and ROI of AI adoption?
Well, it ultimately comes down to total cost of ownership, Swapnil. And while I like to say that LLMs, for example, are probabilistic in nature, their cost isn't. And the price of tokens has been coming down steadily year on year. Now, overall cost is increasing. For different kinds of reasons. But back to what I said at the start, if it's important to tie the cost of ownership of a particular technology to a return on investment, if it's that 20% increase in customer satisfaction. And let me give you a real world example. Swapnil, we work with a very large financial company where through adopting that human in the loop AI, based on generative AI, they're able to increase their throughput rate for this particular kind of financial services from 20 per day to something like 50 per day. Now, that is a very, very significant KPI in that business, and that could be attached directly back to that initial investment and mapped directly against the total cost of ownership. And again, there's nothing magic about AI. You know the token cost up front. Especially Google has some really great tools for understanding where you're spending, how to tune things. It doesn't have to be something which we're spending it out of control. But again, understanding what you're trying to achieve up front is so key to ensuring that you're getting that return on investment. And some of the, again, I'll make a brief comment on some of what we're seeing in the tool space. While token costs are going down, I'm sure you've kind of saw yourself swap now about the likes of Cursor and Anthropic getting rid of their unlimited tiers for their coding tools, which are a different class of AI tool, of course, but same rules apply. While token costs are going down, usage patterns are adapting to cheaper tokens. And in fact, the total cost of ownership of these platforms is actually skyrocketing. And as a result, the companies are having to react. So again, thinking about the use case, thinking about, well, how many tokens is our use case going to consume? What does that scale up to? With the right kind of, technical expertise, which I think is, perfectly reachable by any organization without any particular specialists. I think it's possible to plan up front. While you're still small, while you haven't, you don't have AI in your critical path. And, that's why I recommend small use cases that are maybe lower risk as an initial way to test the water for people looking to adopt AI in 2025.
You mentioned buy-in earlier. The fact is that even with a solid plan, nothing moves without buy-in. How do you advise leaders to build momentum and support across their organization for AI adoption?
Well, let me draw a parallel quickly, Swapnil, to another domain where I believe the same approach works. A lot of what we do at Egen is in security space, and in a way, as encouraging people to adopt security tools is kind of similar as encouraging them to adopt AI tools. And let me explain that quickly. When trying to get people to adopt security tools, there's a certain amount of reticence. There's a certain amount of, well, I don't understand this. It's going to make my job worse. And the way to address that is twofold. Number one, education. You need to tell a team why it is that you're doing what you're doing. In the case of security, prevent breaches, prevent costly breaches that impact customers. In the case of AI, well, it's improving processes. It's doing our jobs quicker. It's doing our jobs more accurately. And the second thing on top of education is to identify those champions, because I think that one of the best things that any organization can do is find those people who are already bought into the idea of new tools. And it's the same whether it's a security tool or an AI tool. They're bought into it. They understand the benefit, and they in effect become the profit for you. And the more of these people you have, the better. But of course, those people have to genuinely believe that what you're proposing is the way forward. But again, I think if a company's done its homework and they have a good story, they have the why, they have the how, and they have the what, then that becomes a relatively straightforward exercise. But it requires cooperation at all levels, Swapnil, from the executive level right down to the tactical level and day-to-day operations.
Many companies start by just dipping their toes into AI. That's what we do with every other new technology out there. But getting to real value is a much longer and much challenging journey. How does Egen help organizations move from those early experiments all the way to the finish line?
Well, it starts with understanding at its core, it's understanding the business, Swapnil. It's understanding all of the parties, all of the people, what the organization looks like. Right down to what those workflows are that they work with. What are the crown jewels? And that might be accepting, finance applications. It might be, validating credit applications. You think of anything any of us does on a daily basis. It might be booking flights. It might be rebooking flights. Those are very complex processes behind the scenes, and that's something that Egen has a lot of experience of. But we also spend a lot of time understanding what those are, first and foremost. It takes a long time before the likes of me will turn up at a customer and say, you want to adopt Gemini, or you should really look at Vertex, or Anthropic is a really good solution here. Because throwing out technology, and I think you talked about this earlier, Swapnil, when you have a big enough hammer, everything looks like a nail. Egen spends a lot of time understanding a business before we make recommendations. And listen, we've turned up at customers where we've said, listen, there isn't really a lot of scope for adopting these kinds of AI-based tools because good heuristic solutions exist. But where we do find that that sweet spot where we're not solving a cheap problem with expensive technology, which happens to be, I think, a case in lots of AI initiatives, then what we do is we sit down with the customer as peers and we walk them through the workflow, where we're going to start. And again, starting small. Imagine, for example, a business workflow that has 7 steps. We're looking at 1 step and we say, how can we improve that? Okay. Now that we've improved that, now we know it's valid. And again, a good use case for those business leaders out there is where success is understood. You know when it's failing and you know when it's passing. And building up from there. Now that's that's not necessarily a difficult process, Swapna, but it's one that requires patience because again, I think we've been led to believe that through the AI zeitgeist that sprinkling some AI on top of something yields instant returns. It doesn't work like that. And I think it'll be a long time before it does. But for now, it's like any other piece of technology in a way, Swapna. Understand the problem, understand what success looks like, and be patient.
Is it possible for you to share a real world example where a company successfully moved from experimentation to real business value with help from Egen?
Sure. Listen, I'll talk I'll talk to anonymize the customer in this case, but I think one of the scenarios that we worked on recently, which I personally worked on, was where we had a large financial where they wanted to basically amplify their customer outreach. So imagine you have a salesperson who has responsibility for an entire region, and they're maybe able to make 20 phone calls a day. And those phone calls tend to be the same in nature. It's call a customer, find out if they're in the market for an add-on, if they're in the market for a renewal of any kind. And listen, if they don't want you to call them, then collect that information. If they do want you to call them, then record the date and time they want to call back on, or if they have questions, then answer the questions. Now, what we did there was we adopted some of Google's latest technology, one of their Gemini Live models, in fact, and we were able to build an agent whose only job it was to make a phone call to somebody, ask them if they're okay to talk or if they wanted to call back, and collect some key information like think of it as qualifying a sales lead, Swapna. And those same people who previously could only make 20 calls a day could go to 200 calls a day, or in theory, 2,000 calls a day. Now, where we come in, of course, is if we do it for one person, can we do it for 2,000 people? And that's really where we were able to deliver a platform into production. It's highly successful. We worked alongside the customer to understand exactly the workflow that they needed to support. Because again, these are ultimately customers you're talking about. If you've got a poor experience with an agent, with an AI bot, you're not only are you going to be annoyed at the agent, you're going to be annoyed at the company. So proving it in a sandbox where you're able to have a small sample of users and then slowly and incrementally build that up to the point where literally the KPI was, can you get the salesperson to qualify 200 leads a day instead of 20? And that was the successful outcome. You'll notice I didn't talk about technology basically at all there, Swapna, and that's deliberate because AI is an enabler. And if you don't understand the problem you're trying to solve, then all the AI in the world is not going to make you any money or reduce ownership or increase return on investment.
Looking at 2026, are you seeing any shift in the type of AI applications organizations are prioritizing, like more focus on generative AI versus traditional machine learning?
Well, again, as a backdrop, 2026 is building on the successes of 2025, and again, for me, 2025 was the year that Gen AI grew up. And what I mean by that is it's the year that we started to put it into critical use cases, where we had real users at scale, like the example I just talked about with that large financial company and their salespeople. That's enabling what I see in 2026. And what I see in 2026 is the very real adoption of agent-based technology into core business workflows at large enterprises and companies. And what do I mean by that? Imagine when you are submitting a tax form, or imagine when you are querying a particular HR policy. Well, increasingly, what you're going to see in 2026 is that those requests are, where possible, offloaded to a very well-tuned and intelligent agent built on something like, Google's ADK or Agent Space or Anthropic or LangGraph, any of those technologies. Technology, I think, doesn't really matter as much as we will see the large scale adoption of well, I guess we call them agentic workflows. I think there's a running joke inside the company that agent is basically anything that you want it to mean. But in essence, what it means is that 2026 will be the year where you see much more wholesale adoption of agents. What does that mean? It means better customer service. It means increased employee satisfaction and retention because they're not waiting on tickets to be closed. It means faster onboarding, for example. And again, we're talking about ultimately back office processes here, which aren't very glamorous, but that's where the real value lies right now in the state of the art in making these processes as quick and as accurate and as responsive as possible.
You've already touched on that, but if you had to give leaders one piece of advice for 2026 to avoid failures with AI, what would that be?
It's a tough ask, Swapnil, but it is to hold your nerve and to trust, in a way, trust your gut that this is a technology like any other, that there's no magic to it, that where you can go to your board and say, we've adopted Gemini or we've adopted Claude and we're going to see a return on investment simply because we're adopting these technologies. The fundamentals are the same as they've ever been, Swapnil. Understand the problem you're trying to solve and try as best you can not get sideswiped or blinded by lots of the very exotic claims, which I'm sure you've seen, Swapnil, about impact on workforce, impact on positions. We're seeing an evolution. Even in software development and in tech, where we're some of the foremost users of the newer models and in terms of coding assistants, we see it day to day. These are great tools, but they require experience in the loop. They require humans in the loop, and you're never going to substitute human conversation for agents talking to each other over an HTTP port. Not ever. Not right now.
There is a lot of focus on technology, but at the end of the day, humans are still the most valuable part of the equation. How should organizations think about people as they adopt AI, not just as users, but as essential partners in augmenting what AI can do?
I boil it down to one simple thing, Swapna, that's critical thinking. And that is to, yes, use the tools. Absolutely use an LLM, ChatGPT or Gemini to summarize a document. But understand that ultimately you're dealing with something which is summarizing, which is probabilistic in nature. And even though it may summarize something accurately 99% of the time, that 1% of the time is still a case that you have to think about. And so I think that the blind trust in an LLM is a very real danger, but which is ultimately addressed by being conscious of seeking to understand what it's telling you, and in a way is not fearing the machine, because as you say, there aren't Terminators walking among us, and there won't be, in my opinion, for a very long time, if ever. And we see this with coding all the time. So, I personally have seen LLMs just invent whole APIs which don't exist, invent Terraform modules, etc., and they do the same with any other kind of document. So, a healthy dose of skepticism, while at the same time understanding that this is a tool that can help you, but being a healthy dose of suspicion and critical thinking.
It's clear that the key to AI adoption in 2026 is not about chasing the latest trend. It's about avoiding the common mistakes and realizing where AI can actually help your organization. Don't look at it as a hammer and nail that we often talk about.
Oh, I think this is good.
A solid foundation for long-term success, and Egen is here to help you. Glenn, thank you so much for sharing your great insights today, and I look forward to chatting with you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Swapna.
For those watching, if your company is also helping out organizations on how to avoid pitfalls and unlock real value from AI, we'd love to hear and share your story on the show. So please reach out to our teams, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and stay tuned for more conversations. Thank you for watching.